A young boy walks into your classroom and immediately sits down without socializing. Without a word, he flings his backpack onto his desk and puts his head down. You've known this student for a while and know him to be very social. You decide there must be something going on and opt to speak with him privately as soon as you get the chance. Unfortunately, your evaluator walks into the room. You go about your lesson, business as usual. The evaluator is only in there for around 10 minutes before leaving. You then pull the student into the hallway to learn that he has recently lost an extended family member and that he has had trouble sleeping. You speak to him about the situation and get him into contact with the counselor. Later that evening, you get your evaluation results only to find out that you scored relatively low due to poor student engagement. This is a story from a former colleague of mine, and it's not somebody that I currently work with. And I do want to point out that this is not regarding any administrator that I have personally worked for or know, but through somebody that I do know. And that is the topic of this episode. We're looking at, has situations such as this caused education to lose its empathy? How can we as educators meet basic student needs as best we can? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Brothers on the Board, the podcast where we become better teachers together. For the basis of this episode, this is an interesting one. We decided to work with a book, and I just so happened to follow a man by the name of Dr. Bryan Pearlman on Twitter, and Wes and I went and picked up his book called Maslow Before Bloom: Basic Human Needs Before Academics. And we read through the book and decided that, okay, we're going to use this as sort of the basis of our conversation today. So, Wes, we've read the book. You ready to have this conversation? How can we as teachers, meet basic student needs?
I am definitely ready. I feel like I've been saying this the whole time we've been doing this podcast. Like, I feel like this is a book written for me, like, because I've been talking about this the whole time, that you need to get the students' basic needs before they'll be engaged in education.
Yeah, I mean, it's pedagogy, right? It's basic pedagogy. When you look at the title, Maslow Before Bloom, and this is a Twitter hashtag that I think Dr. Pearlman has been using for a while. For those of you that don't realize or don't remember, you may be removed from education a little bit. You have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, essentially says that we can't teach students and they can't learn at a high level until their basic needs, sleep, rest, being crazy anxious, until those basic needs are met, they can't really learn. And then you have Bloom's taxonomy, which basically is a level of rigor, a level of understanding. And this title basically suggests that we need to keep Maslow's in mind before we worry so much about test scores and evaluations and everything that comes after, because we can't deal with those things until we take care of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So now that we've introduced the book and we've kind of had that little brief overview there, we kind of want to jump right into it. And we want to start by talking about some of the things that we can do as teachers to hopefully meet student needs as much as we can. Because let's be real, we live in a time, and as teachers, we only have so much power where it's difficult to meet those needs. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I know that there are going to be people who are going to push back with the idea that we are teachers. We should be there to teach, not mental health professionals, not nurses, not all of these other things that really you have to be when you're like an effective teacher in the classroom. So I think that's going to be the biggest pushback we get going forward.
That's a great point. And you do hear teachers that will say that a lot. Like, well, I'm here to teach, right? Well, what exactly does that mean, right? I mean, teaching there's a lot of things that comes with teaching. And the way I've always looked at myself is, okay, yeah, I'm here to help students understand this book or to write an essay. But at the same time, I'm here to teach you how to manage yourself, how to conduct yourself, how to grow up. Right? I'm a huge we are a huge part of the maturation process of them growing up and learning how to turn into young men and women. And we're role models and all this. So like there's so much more that comes with teaching that's not associated with math and English and social studies and all these content areas. So that's the way I've always looked at it. And hopefully a lot of people will agree with this. But again, everyone's entitled to their opinion. It's just, I guess, a matter of how you look at yourself and the profession. So, all right, let's get into this list just a little bit. We have 4 things here that we're going to share that we think teachers should do, and each of these things are based on Dr. Pearlman's Maslow Before Bloom. Kind of some things that we gathered as we read the book. And the first one is this: it's not about you. Don't take it personally. So we all have had students in the past who will say choice things to you when they are upset. I've had students that have cussed me under their breath. I've had students who have called me or other people in the room names. Right? I've had those things happen, and I think you can agree with me, Wes. It's hard not to take it personally sometimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did a whole episode on how students can sometimes hurt your feelings,
Yes, we did.
So yeah, it definitely can hurt sometimes, but you got to remember that like you are the adult in the room.
Yes. You think about your relationships with your parents, your relationships with your husband or your wife, and you think about the arguments or the disagreements that you've had, the many, many things that you have probably said over the course of your relationship that you have regretted. And you think about all those times where that has happened. And I would be willing to admit most people would say, well, there were other things going on at the time in my life that caused me to have a little bit of a hair trigger and to have a short fuse, flip out a little easier. And then you realize, well, it wasn't really about that person. It was about the situation, and that person just kind of happened to be in the way. Right. And that's what happens a lot of times. And it's important for us to realize that, especially with kids, because we don't always know their situation. Right. So I think we have to be careful when we're dealing with a student. We have to be careful not to escalate whatever it is that's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes complete sense. And, we obviously want to provide an equal and equitable education to all students, but equitable education doesn't always mean the exact same. So you don't know that situation. You may know some student situations a little bit more than others. So, addressing those can be different depending on the student.
Yeah, and with teachers especially, I think that I hear this over the course of my career, not necessarily right now with like the people I work with right now, but over the course of my career, I've heard a lot of teachers who, to be honest, they seem more interested in just getting the last word. They seem interested in winning the argument. Right? And I've been guilty of it in the past. I won't lie. I've been guilty about it too. Kids walking down the hallway and they're turning around, they're cussing you, and you're barking stuff back at them, and it turns into that. And I think that we have to realize that we have to try to keep our anger in check sometimes, and realize that we have to be careful. We don't want to get pulled into a power struggle. We don't want to get pulled into this kind of shouting contest with a kid, because more than likely there's something else going on with that student that's causing them to behave that way. More than likely. And I think that kind of brings me to the idea that, you have to be very, very patient to be a teacher. So I have a question, actually. Do you ever like preface a class, like when they come in, if you've had a really, really bad class where you were just You're at your wit's end when that bell leaves. And then the next class comes in, and then you just say, hey, guys, listen, I'm going to be upfront with you right now. It's not you. I'm sorry, but I am at my wit's end. I'm very impatient right now. I'm sorry. I've had some classes today that have been very difficult, and if I come across as being a little more stern or I don't mean to be rude. It's just that I'm really anxious or kind of annoyed right now. Do you ever do that?
I have been known to do that a few times. Yeah. Not I mean, not often, but yeah, I've been known to be like, all right, my patience is very thin, just so you all know today.
Yeah, I try to do that just to let them know kind of my frame of mind. It's like if you had a kid that come in and walked up at the beginning of the bell and was like, "Hey, I had this going on at home yesterday, and I'm really struggling." Like you're inclined now, right, to kind of give that kid a little more leeway because things happen in your lives, and I think it's important that we're open with students as well in terms of what our feelings are and how we feel, and like they need to know that we're people, right? And that even as an adult, that this is how you deal with it. I'm frustrated right now as well. This is how you deal with it. But yeah, I've noticed myself doing that more and more over the last couple of years. I don't know if it's just uh, I don't know if it's just where I just want to. I feel like I'm going to end up getting really frustrated easily with a group, and I need them to understand what's going on or what it is. But I do that occasionally.
And they usually
So
respond really well to it as well. Like
they
my groups
they do,
usually respond pretty well. They're pretty
yeah, they do.
understanding.
Yeah, mine's the same way. I would say, especially this year, I'll say that, and they'll be like, "It's cool. We got you." Right? I get that a lot, and I appreciate that. And I let them know I appreciate it. So in chapter the very first chapter of this book, he has that conversation with a student, and I think the student called him, what was it? It
Fat,
was like,
bald, and stupid.
yeah, I think that's what it
That's
was,
it.
fat, bald, and stupid. And another teacher comes up to him, is angry that the kid hadn't got, I guess, more consequences for the things that he had said. And I think his comment to her was, "Well, two of those things were true." It's like
Yep.
I love I love his self awareness, right? Um, but at the same time, his consequence for the kid was the kid had like destroyed a bulletin board outside, had pulled a bunch of stuff off of it, had just wrecked this bulletin board. But then they found out later, like, okay, the kid is dealing with a lot of stuff at home, just flipped out, had a really bad fit, rage of, kind of went into a rage fit, whatever you want to call it, and tore things off the wall. And the consequence essentially ended up being like, what can we do to repair the situation? And I think the kid eventually apologized and helped put the bulletin board back together. And then they didn't really have any more issues out of him after that. And I think, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but I think we do have to realize that a lot of times just repairing the situation is good enough. And we'll get into that here shortly. So that's number one. Try not to take things personally. I think that's extremely important. Number two, and this is something that, and I think that I'm going to kind of see if you agree with me on this. One of the things that I noticed through these chapters that he was doing through these case studies with these students, because essentially that's what the book is. He's giving case studies or examples from his career as an administrator where he has had to deal with some of these students or has observed students being dealt with. And I would say one of the things that he does really well that he kind of talks about, or at least we observe, is that he doesn't talk at students, and most of the time he's listening. Would you agree with that for the most part?
Yeah, I completely agree. He's listening. He's kind of reacting and um, modeling the behavior that the student should be experiencing. It seems like how a normal conversation should go, keeping them calm. Um, and I think that he does an excellent job of working with the students, calming them down, and then like having a conversation with them.
And also, not just with the students, but with parents as well. You know, a lot of times you have teachers that, again, we go back to that I've got to get the last word, or I've heard teachers in the past that they're just on a kid and they just stay on a kid. Like the kid never has a chance to breathe. They're keeping the kid from talking. Like that's what they're trying to keep the kid from talking, quite frankly, right? They're not giving them a chance to talk. Like I'm not going to give you a chance to explain yourself. Like you were wrong. This is what you did wrong, and I'm just going to keep going at you, right? I'm in charge kind of mentality, which I understand that, this is your room, this is your classroom, these are your rules. Like I get that, but a lot of times I think that, especially with kids, that, and I've got one girl in particular that a former student of mine that comes to mind when I'm thinking about this, that just they're ready to explode with things that they just need to say. They just can't. They just need to say it, and if I just give them the stage, if I pull them in the hallway just for 45 seconds and let them get it out, whatever it is that they need to say, then we're good. We're fine. They just want to go out. They just want to vent about whatever's going on. They want to go on. They want to hear themselves speak to a degree. They just need somebody to listen. That's all they need, right? And then okay, I'm not saying you have to agree with what they say, but I'm at least let them say it. Let them tell you what's going on, because a lot of times that's when we find out what these basic needs are that haven't been met, is when you have conversations and when you just stop talking and let them talk. So I think that's something that is extremely important. Do you have students that come to mind when we talk about this, that you kind of think of, that are just, they're very opinionated and they just need to talk. They need to get it off their
Oh
chest.
yeah. Oh yeah. They have to at least get their 2 cents in, May not be the exact last word, but they have to at least feel like they are being heard. And I feel like most of us are like that. Like most people want to be heard, right? We want our opinion or our take on the situation to be heard. I don't feel like that's an unreasonable
Yeah.
thing
To at least be
to
considered.
at least be
Right? We
considered.
want, yeah. Most of the time, I will say that the conversation isn't usually about me, right? It's usually not them frustrated with me. It's usually them frustrated with another student, right? At lunch, so and so said this to me, and then they did this, and then this, and they're just going on. And a lot of times, whatever it is, because as teachers, one of the unfortunate things about teaching is that it's very reactionary. We catch the person who does something second, right? Someone throws and hits a paper wad, they throw it and hit a kid, and then you turn around and then the kid throws it back. Well, what happens? Hey, come here. They walk up to you. What are you doing? You throwing paper wads in here. Oh, well, he threw it at me first. Like, it was like, well, I know, but I saw you do it,
Yeah.
right? Because as teachers, I was talking to a kid about this actually just like 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, and it sucks, but it's true. As teachers, we have to go based on what we see and hear for the most part. Now, if it's something that is crazy that warrants an investigation, that's a whole different story. But if we tried to investigate every little thing that happened every day, you would never teach, right? So most of the time we have to go based on what we see and hear. But for those kids who does something second and gets caught, a lot of times you just need to hear what they have to say, right? Like, just take a minute and just let them explain what happened. Because a lot of times when they feel like you're not even listening, you're like, here's this and this, and you're just giving a bunch of consequences and jumping on them, you're not even hearing their side. I think that not only does it make the issue linger, they don't really learn anything from it, but it also, I think, damages your relationship with them a little bit.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I'm not going to be I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to be friends or kind to someone who wasn't kind to me, or show respect to someone who doesn't show respect to me. Not going to happen.
As teachers, sometimes we try to demand respect rather than earning respect. And that's, and I will agree. I will agree to an extent. I know that a lot of teachers will say, well, I'm a teacher. I went to school for so many years. I should be respected right out of the gate, but I've got news for you. A lot of students aren't going to respect you just because you're a teacher. That means absolutely nothing to a lot of students. You have to earn their respect. You have to show them that you're there for them before they're willing to work for you or to help you. I mean, that's just reality. Okay. It sucks, but it's true. All right. Before we move on to number 3, anyone who has joined us and listened so far, I would really, really appreciate it if you would jump over to our Facebook page, Brothers on the Board, and hit the little follow button. Just smash that little like button, just a little
Just a
bit.
little tap.
Just
Just a little tap.
just give it a little. You ever watch Happy Gilmore? Just a little tap. Give it a little tap, tap, tappy. We'd appreciate that. We have conversations on there. We want to try to build a community where we can learn from you and you can learn from us. So we would really appreciate it if you would do that. All right, on to number 3. Nothing left to say about the last one. Let's get on to it. I believe, and again, this is coming from that first chapter of Maslow Before Bloom. I kind of believe that apologies and reflections are more valuable than detentions and suspensions. What do you think?
Oh, 100%. I believe there's definitely a place for detentions and suspensions and those kinds of consequences. I think that sometimes they are over exhausted. Lunch detention doesn't mean anything if you are given lunch detention 10 times a day.
It loses its power.
It loses its power.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
I feel like holding a lot more weight is those apologies and actions that you can see and experience.
Now, I will say this. I do want to throw my little disclaimer out here. This in no way means that we're not talking about big things here. We're not talking about violence, drug use, attacking somebody. This is we're talking about those behaviors in the classroom being disruptive, right? Those kinds of things.
What you would consider a tier 1.
Yeah, tier one offenses, or chronic, maybe not even chronic. Now there are some that's higher than tier 1. Obviously, I would consider in chapter 1 this kid vandalizing the bulletin board. That's beyond a tier 1, right? That's you're getting into some more higher tier consequences here. But even in certain situations, kid cussing you, right? Things like that. I think apologies should play a very prominent role in how students are handled. Now, I get it. Some people will say, well, they'll just say they're sorry and then they do the same thing. And if that's the case, now it's chronic. It's a whole different issue. Maybe we're looking at putting them on a behavior plan or something like that. If it's something that's continuing over and over and over. But if a kid has a bad day, something's going on at home, they just got dumped by their girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever it is, and you jump onto them about something and then they spit something back at you and you have a real problem with it. I mean, it could very well be the case that they got something else going on. And an apology, in my mind, for a 12 or a 13-year-old, an apology, a reflection, really owning behavior will go a lot farther than an after-school detention or in-school suspension or something like that, because that's the goal. And 7th graders especially, dude, that is a much worse punishment. Having to go say I'm sorry to a teacher for whatever they did, because let's be real, there's a lot of them that aren't sorry,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can get them to own it and say, you know what, I was just having a bad day, I have some stuff going on, I'm sorry, I was disrespectful. That's gold, man. Like, why are we don't give them the option to do that enough? What do you think?
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, like I said, being like they get to really see the the consequence of it. They get to experience it, feel it, rather than just like sitting in a room and for 30 minutes and then leaving. I got a question for you. Have you ever, now we're going to flip it real quick here. Have you ever apologized to a class for your behavior?
Yes, this year. I did it this year for the first time in, man, I think 3 years. I lost my patience with a class, and they found out real quick. Um, I'm not one to raise my voice a ton. Now, this is usually how I speak pretty much all the time. I don't speak real loud. My voice doesn't travel. I don't yell at kids. That's just not really me. There was a point earlier this year where it was just a constant string of things all day. Some of my coworkers are out, so I was trying to like cover some other classes a little bit throughout the day. I had a lot on my plate. There was a group of kids that was causing a bunch of issues in the class. And I'd already had to deal with multiple of these issues. And I don't remember a kid. Um, I sent a kid to the office or something like that. He slammed the door on the way out. And when he slammed that door, dude, it just triggered me. I lost my patience and I went off on him in the hallway. Hey, you don't slam my door, all this other stuff. And then I went in the classroom and then I was going on about their behavior and, you guys have been too loud, blah, blah, blah. And I was just freaking out. And, they did what every other class does when you do that. They get dead silent. You can hear a very awkward, uncomfortable silence where you can hear a pin drop. And the more I hate that image of myself. I hate that image of myself. As I calmed down and I had started to think about it, I regretted it immediately. I pretty much immediately regretted it because I'm of the opinion that when you raise your voice, you lose power in your room when you raise your voice a lot of times because you hear those teachers that are screaming all the time, right? All the time, and it does nothing. It becomes white noise. So yeah, I did. I said, hey guys, listen. I went to the kid that slammed the door. He was in the office at that point. I had another teacher cover my class, and I said, hey man, listen, I'm having a bad day, and I owe you an apology. Yeah, you slammed my door, but I'm the adult, and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have raised my voice at you. And he was same way. He's like, all right, my bad. And then we shook on it, and we were like, we cool? And I said, yeah, we cool. And then that was it. That was the end of it, and didn't have any more issues. And I went back to the class and told them, hey, I'm sorry, guys. That's not usually me. I'm having a rough day, and I lost my temper a little bit. But yeah, no, did it this year.
And I bet you that had more weight than just yelling at them and like being done with it.
I would like to think so. I mean, obviously, everything throughout the rest of this year has seemed to have gone pretty good. I feel like I have a good relationship with my students. But each person, each teacher is different, and it's just like students. And I know that a lot of teachers are just like, nope, ain't doing that. What I say goes. And it's hard for me to say like, oh well, this is what you have to do. Like I think everybody's different, but for me personally, that's just kind of the way I am. What about you? You ever had to apologize to a class? Or?
I have. I haven't this year because I haven't really lost my cool. I have like a phenomenal group this year. Like this is a great group, but I have in the past. Like, but this group of students is I've been very lucky with my group of students this year, and if they're listening, you all are awesome. So
I'm sure that they are. My students, I don't think they've quite caught on to the fact that I have a podcast yet. It's probably coming. But I know your kids are always commenting on things, so I know they're here.
They're like, Mr. How to see you on my For You page. I'm like, awesome.
Yeah, I see them randomly commenting on stuff. I'm like, do they know it's me that's mainly on this page? But anyways, apologies, I do believe, do carry far more weight than detentions. And again, there is a place for detentions, suspensions, all those
Absolutely. We're not saying
I'm not saying
no consequences.
Yes, this is a quick disclaimer. Not saying that, but we are too quick to use those things. I do believe.
I agree.
And finally, our last one: accept that you will fail, but never fail to try. Never fail to try. I think when we first get into teaching, we want to be empathetic to student situations, and we want to do what we can to try to meet some of those student needs and hear them out and try to hook them up with people that can get them help, whether it's a counselor and all those things. We want to change lives. That's why we became a teacher. And I think we get very, very discouraged in those first few failures where the kid just doesn't change, where their behavior never changes, where the kid's home life, you have zero control over what happens in their home life and you feel helpless. I think a lot of teachers lose that, but you have to realize that sure, you're going to fail and you're going to fail and you're going to fail again. But then finally, when you succeed, when you see a kid change, when you see a kid come back to you 2 years later, 3 years later, and they say, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that you did a lot for me. I really appreciated it." It makes everything worth it. Wouldn't you say that's the case?
Oh, 100%. I'm actually getting to that point in my career where like my seniors are coming back from high school and I'm seeing some of them. So it's really awesome to see that happen. Or they'll like see me out in public, be like, "Oh, I remember when we did this," or "Thank you for that."
Mhm.
Like it happens. So it feels great.
Yeah, yeah, and in the book, in Maslow Before Bloom, one of my biggest criticisms as I read through the first probably half of the book was like, okay, I need to see failures, right? And obviously, if you're going to write a book about your profession and about the highlights of your career, especially when you've had a career spanning as long as Dr. Pearlman has, you're going to have a list of just excellent experiences that you can talk about, and you should talk about them, right? But I was like, I really hope he gives us a failure. I really hope teachers see that it doesn't always work out. And I'm not going to say which chapter. There's actually a couple of chapters. I'm not going to say which ones, but they are there, and you do realize that okay, you have to try to be empathetic to a student's situation, and it may not always work out. So as you were reading, did you get that same impression, sort of?
Yeah, I believe I texted you about it. I think I was the first one to say, like, man, I got to see something. Like, I got to see some failures here because, like, I know it's not everything is sunshine and perfect. So, and he did give it to us finally. Dr. Perlman did show us that sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's life, right? It's not perfect. No one's batting 100. So,
No, as much as we would love to
that
be.
was absolutely.
Um, so you have all these situations. We've talked about a few different things here. We talked about not taking things personally, right? We talked about just listening, right? We talked about trying to get kids to own their behavior before you just jump straight to, well, you have a detention. Like how can you have a kid learn from their mistakes? And then lastly, accepting that you will fail. Now there's a lot of other things that we can do, right? At the beginning of the episode, I talked about a student who came in and put their head down, and the teacher was kind of dinged on their evaluation because they didn't make the student get their head up. There are other things like if I have a kid who comes in who every day is, you know, up and about and doing their work and everything else, like, you know, and suddenly they come in and they put their head down, like that's out of character for them, right? I may not be coming over and jumping them saying, "Hey, get your head up right now. You have to do these notes, all this stuff." Like, there's probably something else going on that probably warrants a private conversation, seeing what can you do to understand what's going on first before you jump to getting on a kid in front of the class, or because like I feel like that's a recipe for disaster. It could just be the kid didn't get sleep. I mean, it happens, and it I know that teachers are pretty quick to be like, well, you do not sleep in my class. Like, I get that, but if it's a one-off thing where a kid just came in and they've just crashed, uh, there have been times, and I don't know if I'm supposed to admit this, that I've let them sleep. If I'm like, okay, I think something's going on, I may not wake them up in the middle of my lesson and jump them in front of the entire room because they're not paying attention or whatever it is. Now, most of the time, obviously, you got the chronic sleepers. You know the one I'm talking about. Every day they come in, put their head down. That's the ones you're always walking past, like, hey, bud, get your head up. I need you to do this. But for a kid that's just doing it one time and heads down, it's like, okay, this I'm going to let them rest for now because something's going on, and I want to have a conversation with them here in a little bit and see if we can figure it out, right? Students who are hungry, haven't had enough to eat, right? I know that there's a teacher, one of my coworkers, that she always keeps extra food, always keeps extra food. A kid, like, nobody goes hungry when this teacher's around. Let me tell you, she's fantastic with being empathetic with student situations. Um, so there's a lot of things that we as teachers just have to be aware of, and I think a lot of this comes down to, sadly, a lot of it comes down to just not necessarily being able to do a whole lot about, obviously, home situations, but at least being empathetic enough to listen and care. How would you, as like, kind of, where are you at with that?
Um, I mean, I agree with it that, I think I always say, like, if I was worried about where I was, sleeping that night, or whose house I was going to be at, or if I was worried about where am I going to eat this evening, I'm not going to be worried about learning about the process of photosynthesis, right?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, even if I'm worried about what people are saying to me about me on social media, right? That happens. I'm not going to be worried about this. So I think just having that understanding that we are all basic, humans. We all have these problems, and trying to address them with the student is definitely important. Now, again, like you said, if this is a consistent issue, then we're gonna have to figure something out. But if it's a one-off thing, then just understanding and taking the time to listen, which we tell our students that all the time, right? I mean, these are
Mhm.
things we tell students, we teach students in our SEL lessons, our social emotional lessons. Like, don't lose your cool. Think about the other person's shoes before you react. I mean, it's things that we are already trying to teach the students that I think sometimes as teachers we forget, and we have to kind of remember as well.
Yeah, sometimes we forget that, we have to model, we have to practice what we preach. They're the whole "do as I say, not as I do" kind of thing can't really apply to us. We have to be the ones that do it in order for students to also want to do it. So, anyways, I think that pretty much wraps up what we have to say here about ways that we can try to be empathetic and meet student needs in the classroom as much as we possibly can within our power. I do encourage everyone, if you are looking for an interesting book to read, I definitely recommend Dr. Pearlman's Maslow Before Bloom. I think it's a good book. I think it sets a good kind of precedent. There's Wes holding it up in the camera. I think it does set a good precedent for kind of how we can approach certain student behaviors, and that we just have to be as understanding as we can when it comes to dealing with students and their difficult situations. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in and listening to us. We hope that you continue to have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time on Brothers on the Board.